Good morning, everyone. Just my friend here, it's not afternoon and it's not morning. Good noon. Is there a phrase, a good noon? We should invent one. And welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to see you all. And we're happy to host Dr. Miriam Feldmann, Kaye, teaching in Feldmann University. And we were happy to host her as part of our Yom Yun for Pesach. So, Miriam, glad to have you here.
Good morning, everybody. It's really an honor to be here. And well done to everyone for coming out to learn about Pesach. It's very impressive. I'm scared of the word Pesach, so and it's actually been really meaningful for me to begin to think about it from a spiritual, religious, philosophical perspective, and not just a domestic perspective. So thank you. So my name's Miriam. I'm a lecturer in Jewish philosophy at Bar-Ilan University in the Department for Jewish Philosophy. And it's also really nice to come into the world of Bet Midrash, Midrasha, and to come and share some ideas, and not only from the perspective of dry academia. So there's 1,000 things we can talk about when we speak about Pesach. And what I'm going to try to do also is to try and put aside my kind of academic philosophical mind and to really explore an idea with you, which is really to do with our lived experience of Pesach. And I'm going to explain soon what I mean by that. And given that I was asked to speak about Rav Jonathan Sachs, the late Rav Jonathan Sachs, my mentor and teacher for many years, we're going to explore that idea through his thinking. Always the tears come to my mind, even though quite a while has passed. And I want to dedicate the shiur today to the continued refuah of the Chayal Ari Spitz, who after 6 weeks of severe injury has woken up and regained consciousness. So this is for him. Okay. So what's this one idea that I'm talking about? This one idea is the idea of time. Okay. And we're going to look at time through what we do, our practice and our ritual of Seder night, of Leila Seder. Okay. So how do we engage in the idea of time? Okay, so first I'm going to explain the question, and I'm going to ask you a question. What are the associations that you have with this idea? Okay, so we're going to start with, has everybody got a source sheet? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start at the beginning, and I'm going to read a pasuk from the Haggadah that many of you are familiar with, and we're going to study it from what I hope is a new and original perspective and reach a new understanding, a new interpretation of it. So I'm going to read the pasuk and the translation, and then I'm going to ask you what it means to you. B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lirot et atzmo ke'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim. In each generation, one must view themselves as if they themselves experienced the exodus from Egypt. What does this mean to you? Are there questions that arise from this? Is there something confusing about this? Does it make it more meaningful that we ourselves have to be involved? Sometimes I say to my students, all answers are legitimate, and then I regret it. But yes.
It could be either that he has to look backwards in history and see himself as one of the original people that walked. Or it could be in each generation, including now, he has to see himself as living metaphorical, not
Wow.
historical.
Brilliant. Now, it's the both parts of what you said are spot on. And the second part, I think, in Israeli culture and society today, perhaps not only, I mean, even Jewish life today, there's a tendency to see Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, as a metaphor. Okay, and there's a song like from Eti Ankri, the Israeli singer, who basically poses this question: what is your Yetziat Mitzrayim? Right? She's not just talking about the kitchen. I think she's talking about you know, your personal journey, your spiritual journey. What is your exodus? Where are you kind of on your big journey towards? Where have you come from, and where are you moving towards? So yeah, those are definitely two really important perspectives. Any other ideas? Yes.
This is not my original thought. Once presented to me, the idea of time being sort of like a coil, to think of it that way. So that as time goes on, when you get to the same place as the year goes around, you're 1 year ahead, but you're in the same place. And that has resonated with me sometimes as we sit down to the Seder, and I say, with a couple of changes, I'm eating the same food that we've been eating for thousands of years. I'm saying the same words, and it puts me in a different perspective. And then what does it mean to be really at something that's running? Like it's so for me, it's sometimes that sort of time travel, which is not
Wow.
like it all folds, time folds into each other, and we're in the same place.
Could you
Thank
repeat
you.
what they say so that people on Zoom?
Yes. Firstly, it's a really powerful idea. It's like I'll paraphrase as part of my answer. It's the idea of concentric circles, or kind of time that we go through that is supposedly new, that we're kind of coming to new times, but actually in the Jewish year, especially, you know, we're reliving certain chagim and certain events, and in one sense, kind of time has gone on. We're all a year older, certain things have happened, but in another sense, like you said, we're eating the same foods, we're doing the same things, right? So our lived experience of Seder night is at the same time similar to us, not similar, familiar to us. This is the problem when you teach in Hebrew and your English gets worse. It's very ironic, but it's very familiar to us what we do on Seder night, but we're meant to be in a different place. We are in a different place, but we're also, so it's kind of already complicates the notion of time. So thank you for that. Any other ideas? I just want to get a sense of what it means to you, B'chol Dor V'Dor. Yes.
Well, you actually wrote it, I was thinking of it, but you wrote it. I think it's the only Yom Tov that we actually reenact all of, except for the Korban, reenact all of the stages of Yetziat Mitzrayim at the Seder itself.
Right. So we're not just talking about, we're not kind of memorializing one event.
You read the Megillah Purim, but you're not reenacting the whole thing that brought you to Megillat Esther. You're just reading it.
Brilliant.
You're actually incorporating everything of what the Bnei Israel did in their own home.
So the comparison with Purim is a brilliant one in terms of time, because as we said, when we read Megillat Esther, we're reading about a a story that happened, supposedly history, although there are also elements of kind of living that out, you know, we dress up, you know, that there are parts of that we kind of bring into our lives. But also, like you say, in Seder night, we're really kind of going through stage by stage, right? The bitterness, the slavery, and then through to the wine and the Geulah, and all of the things that kind of that come with that, and saying Hallel as if we ourselves have experienced a miracle that, you know, that we don't even say on Purim, but we say it on Leila Seder, even though we haven't actually experienced it. Yeah, hi.
Just thought of something.
Yeah.
This is a very difficult concept for most people, certainly for children. So for children, we're telling them, think about what it was like for the Jews to leave Mitzrayim. On that level, they can act it out, actually, picture it, they can draw it. As we get older, we have different experiences, and some of us have really gone through a Yetziat Mitzrayim in our lives. And if we can actually feel what that Yetziat Mitzrayim is every year, then we might be able to feel something similar to what they went through.
Wow.
So it's like, you can use this sentence as you grow in different ways.
Okay, so just remind me of your name.
Judy.
Judy. Okay, so Judy's saying that you know, firstly, the differentiation between how children see it, maybe it might seem more abstract for them, you know, how could they possibly imagine what something is like? But then on the other hand, we also have all of the tools in place to feel like we are reliving it, we are experiencing it. And I guess that the hope is that we will inculcate our children with those values so that they themselves will feel that they're experiencing it. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wanted to share? Yeah.
I think that's because the cycle of oppression and redemption is repeated, and
Uh-huh.
that's why we have to tell it to our children. We don't hear that about Sukkot, you know, in other words, this is integral to our experience, Jews.
Thank you. Yeah, and I love the reference to Sukkot there as well, because with, you know, with Sukkot, there's so much we can talk about, right? We can go through the whole Matzah and talk about, you know, because we do go outside of our homes into Sukkot, into huts to represent something. We do, you know, in the Jewish calendar, we have lots of these examples like Purim, like Sukkot, where we live out experiences, where we have lived experiences, and that are also built into the halakha, they're built into Jewish law, right? They're not just suggestions, you know, well, who wants to go and sit in a hut, or, right? There's a lot of work involved in it, and there's a very deep purpose to it. But Seder night is different, and we're going to see how Seder night is different. I'm not going to say I prefer it over all of the other chagim, but there is a very powerful and special message of Pesach. Okay, so you can see in source 2 that the injunction to see yourself as if you went out of Egypt is also reflected in Mishnah Pesachim. Now, for Rav Jonathan Sanks, who wrote about, I'm not going to do a general introduction because I'm kind of presuming some prior knowledge, and apologies in advance. He wrote about a whole gamut of ideas of Jewish life. He wrote to non-Jewish audiences, he wrote to Jewish audiences. One of the most profound examples that he uses time and time again, including to non-Jewish audiences, is that of Seder night. Okay, not the whole of Pesach necessarily, but actually Seder night. We're talking about, you know, a few hours in a year here, you know, so how can this one thing be so significant? And what we're going to see is really a whole explanation and interpretation of the idea of time and Jewish life and history and thought through Seder night. Okay, so here's a reference to Purim, actually. So the first the first question that I'm going to ask before we start reading is the following. Given the examples you've given, how are we meant to? How is it that we can be asked to live something, to relive something, to remember something that we did not actually experience? Right? Because through the Seder, we're meant to kind of have some collective, familial, collective memorial of the Exodus, of Yetziat Mitzrayim, as if we ourselves were there. But we were not there. So how can we be asked to do such a thing? Is that not unrealistic? Is that not even unfair? I mean, and if we're learning about a story, why is there no Megillat Leila Seder? Why do we not just come together and listen to Parashat Shemot again? You know, what is it that we're going through? What are all of those different stages? What we're going to see is also a different idea of history. Okay, that we're not just talking about, you know, what happened and us memorializing what happened, but we're talking about our lives in the present and our Jewish collective destiny in the future. So be ready to completely have the idea of Pesach as a historical story turned on its head, because through this idea of time, we're actually going to be talking about the present and the future. Okay. Source number 3. Telling the story of a miracle on Purim is an act of memory. Okay, and this is referring to the idea of the Megillah. On Pesach, however, we do not merely tell the story, we relive it. We eat the bread of oppression and the bitter herbs, we taste the wine of freedom. We recline as free people. And he calls this, Rav Sachs, reenactment. It's like drama. It's like involving ourselves in a kind of in a play, in a theatrical play of what happened. Some people might call it going through the motions, but often when we use the phrase going through the motions, it sounds like it's something foreign or required of us. But this is really kind of implicating yourself in the story. Okay. And we can see in a continuation of this in source number 4, really a development of this idea, which is from Rav Sachs's book, A Letter in the Scroll, also known as Radical Then, Radical Now. So on Pesach, we return to Egypt. Listen to the language. We return to Egypt. Okay, so he's already kind of using this language of reenactment and reliving. Okay, we eat the bread of affliction and the bitter herbs of slavery. On Shavuot, we are at Sinai, hearing the 10 Commandments and sharing in the covenant. I'll just pause there for a minute, because one of the other main ideas in Jewish thought and in Jewish life that we are meant to feel that we were part of, or that we were actually involved in, is what? Is Matan Torah. We are meant to see ourselves as having been present at Ma'amad Har Sinai and receiving the Torah. And, you know, that as being maybe the epitome of what it means for the Jewish people to receive the Torah. That is also said about Pesach. Okay? And, you know, the festivals are the supreme transformation of history into memory, from events in the distant past into a personal experience of the present. And here we can see how actually Pesach is not about reliving the story. We might know, for example, you know, that we know the story very well. When we read Magid, you know, we're so, again, presuming we're familiar with Shemot. We know the psukim, like you said, you know, we've learned this last year. We're learning this again and again. So, you know, when something is familiar, what happens to us? You know, do we get bored reading the same thing again, or do we actually? And what are we meant to do? What is that meant to do to us? It's meant to bring us into a lived experience of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Yes.
I find it interesting that there's no mention of the Pesach, it's matzah moror, but when we say it, we put Pesach first, we say Pesach matzah moror. And I find that it's the easiest to relate to because what we're doing in terms of memory and application to our daily lives now and relating to it is to take the God of the Egyptians and sacrifice it the same way we could take the immorality, the difficulties, the challenges of today's society and say, no, we're different. We're going to be an Am Segula, an Am Kadosh, and not relate to that. And so it's memory, but we are reliving it when we think about the Pesach, as well as the matzah and the more, the bitterness, which was more passive. The more certainly was passive. We can, of course, experience today what's going on. But I find that Pesach is so relevant today to what we should be doing with our lives.
Wow. So I want to save part of what you said for the end, but the idea of relating it to our lives today is really important. You know, perhaps I'm wondering why he doesn't mention Pesach here and why he focuses twice on the matzah and the maror. I think, you know, the Pesach being a sacrifice might be an idea that would speak less to certain people today. And remember that he's, you know, some of this he's writing for a non-Jewish audience. He also spoke about this in his famous TED talk, which I think got over 1 million views on YouTube, where he speaks about matzah and maror and not Pesach. So I'll think more about that. The application to today's life, I mean, that's not just another shir, it's a whole course, right? The bitterness, the maror that we're experiencing today, I don't want to cry again, but on so many levels, it's not only applicable, but it's something that we're, you know, that we might even feel some kind of identification with eating the maror this year. And then also, you know, in that tefillah for a kind of a liberty that may happen. It's also, you know, so relevant on a societal level. Justice, oppression, evil, it's huge. And it's, you know, another whole, one of those other kind of ideas in parallel to the idea of the metaphor of Yetziat Mitzrayim, everybody's own personal Yetziat Mitzrayim. So that's also something that's absolutely going on in parallel to all of this. Thank you. Okay. So let's continue with thinking about how, you know, let's take on this idea that, you know, the Pesach, the Haggadah Shel Pesach and Leil HaSeder is not a historical text, and we're not merely going over, you know, there's no Megillat Leil HaSeder. Okay, we're kind of reading these psukim from the Torah, and we're meant to be actually implicated through the rituals in what we're doing. This word reenactment, okay, which is absolutely, you know, being absolutely involved in that experience. Okay. Source 5 is probably the most, I think the sentence for me that most expresses this idea of time, and how actually through this whole idea of Seder night, we're now going to complicate this idea of past, present, future. We're going to say this isn't a retelling of history, okay, and this isn't even only about memorialization, but this is about what happens to us in the present, okay, and of course including the children, not only, you know, so that they have an experiential night, but also in the terms of inculcating the values and the whole process of education, which was meant to be proactive and not passive. Okay, source 5, we make a leap across time and turn the then into now. Okay, we're going to actually kind of come away from seeing the story as a historical as history, essentially. And we're going to think more about what it means to memorialize, and how in Seder night, we're memorializing through living out ourselves. We're implicating ourselves in that experience. Okay, and we're going to see soon, you know, how that relates to the collective destiny of the Jewish people. I have to say that, you know, at this juncture, there's a really important question, because when we're talking about, you know, I think especially in today's world and what's going on in Western society at the moment, post October 7th, the idea of changing our concept of history, I think, is actually quite dangerous. This is a question I definitely would have asked Rav Sachs, but saying, you know, we're saying this isn't a Megillah, this isn't objective history, you know, we're talking about ourselves. Now, quite dangerous things are being done with this view of history in today's world, revisionist history, colonial, post-colonial history, and where that's kind of the positions that is allowing to develop, or has allowed to develop, that we're kind of seeing the dangers of that now. So I think what I'm saying is you know, it's very specifically an inner Jewish experience and not a comment about history in itself. So of course I can't ask Rav Sachs about that, but I also think we have to be careful when we talk about changing our idea of history, that we're, you know, it's not as a soft. Okay. So moving back to the Haggadah, source 6. 3/4 of the Hebrew Bible is made up of historical narratives. One of Rav Sachs's favorite things to do was to count words and letters and psukim and how many times certain things appear, and based on that, he made kind of entire theological arguments. Jews were the first to make the momentous claim that history has meaning. It is not merely a sequence of disconnected events, but the long story of humanity's response to or rebellion against the voice of God as it echoes in the conscience of mankind. Biblical Hebrew has no word for history. Modern Hebrew had to borrow a word, historia. Now, in Bar Ilan, actually, just as an aside, there are 2 departments of history. There's a department in my faculty of Jewish studies, which is called Toldot Am Yisrael. I'm not going to use the word history of the Jewish people, which is how they translate it into English, but it's more like the development, I would say. Toldot, I think, is an amazing word. The development of the Jewish people. And then in the humanities faculty, there is a department called Historia Klalit, general history, and there are all these kind of internal debates about, you know, well, what does that mean? This is very much kind of at the heart of how we define the meaning of history in our Jewish lives today, you know, and in modern Israel. How do we kind of separate out the departments, and how do we know where the idea of collective memory ends, and where this idea of, you know, so-called objective history begins? So this word, we have this word in modern Hebrew, historia. The key word of the Hebrew Bible is not history, but memory. And then, of course, he goes on to give numerous examples. Zachor, the command to remember, occurs time and time again in the Torah. Jews were to become a people of memory. Okay, so this is really part of the kind of moving away from the idea of history. And it's very much connected. The idea of time that we now arrive at is very much connected to a philosophical school of thought. It's called phenomenology. It was one of the main philosophical schools of thought in modern times. Many Jewish thinkers and scholars have been influenced by phenomenology. It's it's a long word, but the meaning is very clear. The meaning is of seeing events as internal phenomenon, looking at time as phenomenal. Okay, so I know sometimes when we use the word phenomenal, you know, we say that's amazing, you know, it's phenomenal, right? But there's also another word to phenomenon, which is, it's a phenomenon, right? Something amazing occurs. But when you say something as a phenomenon, it's from the inside perspective. Okay, and the idea of time in phenomenology, and you'll soon we'll see where this is going, because it comes right back to Seder night, is very much to do with how we experience time and how we experience our Yetziat Mitzrayim on Seder night. Okay, because time is no longer trapped in the definitions of being linear, of being chronological, or historical in that very kind of dry, maybe objectivist way. But actually, in the religious language, and the Jewish religious language, time is a phenomenon. We're meant to use time to really become part, to experience the phenomenon. And Seder night is the ultimate example of this phenomenon, where time is not linear, right? Where there's no Megillah. Time is about how we live and experience something, this amazing phenomenon, Yetziat Mitzrayim, which then becomes the basis for Matan Torah, Ma'amad Har Sinai, okay, which is the culmination, which eventually of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Okay. One of the main questions which Judy began to touch upon is how we inculcate this sense of not just the story of Pesach, right? The involvement, how we inculcate the values of involvement, of how do you teach experience? How do you teach lived experience through Leil HaSeder? And for this, I don't know if some of you are familiar with Rav Sax's idea of each person, each Jew as being a letter in a Torah scroll. It's not only an idea that it's also a Hasidic idea, that everybody represents a letter or is a potential letter in the Torah, and each individual, and only that individual, everybody is responsible for writing their own letter in the scroll. Okay, only you can be you. Only you can write your letter. There's nobody else who can come and say, in an age of assimilation outside Israel and intermarriage, there's nobody else who can take responsibility for the continuation of Jewish identity, except for that person themselves. Each person is responsible for themselves. Okay. In the many parallel shiurim that we could do, that we could give about Rav Saks and Pesach, we would also talk about the idea of freedom as based on the differentiation of Isaiah Berlin as freedom to do something and freedom from something. Often we think of the idea of freedom as, I'm free to do anything I like. But, in Jewish thought and in Jewish life, we see this idea of freedom to taking more freedom as responsibility, taking responsibility for those around us, for society, which is of course another message, but not for today. Okay, so let's talk about inculcating this idea of time. Source 7, Schools of Freedom. Text that's not very well known. Listen to this. Freedom, okay, and the experience of freedom ultimately needs 3 institutions: parenthood, education, and memory. You must tell your children about slavery and the long journey to liberation. They must annually taste the bread of affliction and the bitter herbs of slave labor. They must know what oppression feels like if they are to fight against it in every age. Continuing on to source 8, freedom is more than a moment of political triumph. It is a constant endeavor throughout the ages to teach those who come after us the battles our ancestors fought. I'm just going to pause here in the middle of the sentence to say that this is very much like the linear history, or the historia klalit, that we're meant to teach about. We're meant to teach about things that happen about Yetziat Mitzrayim. But this is being something that's ongoing, Toldot Yisrael, not just Historia in the past, okay? And we're now kind of relinquishing that very strict idea of tenses that we have, okay? And we're kind of freeing ourselves from a very kind of limited idea of time, saying that this time actually is something that develops. Toldot Yisrael, okay? The development of the experience, which is then not just ours. It's not just Ki'ilu, hu yatzami Mitzrayim. It's also who you are responsible for, so that they also see themselves as going out of Mitzrayim, so that they themselves will then want to go and write that letter in the Torah. Okay? And there's a big idea here of responsibility, not just kind of you sitting by yourself reenacting this. And that, of course, you know, makes us think back to that first Seder night of Corona times, of COVID. And, you know, what does it mean to have Seder night alone, right? And then contrasting that with, you know, maybe, you know, all of the other years where the idea is for us to be together, okay, which is not just a kind of, it's nice to be together, but there's also a huge religious, spiritual, and experiential value to experiencing it together. But nevertheless, everybody has to experience it themselves. Okay, so when you see those faces after at the table, after they've tasted the maror, you know, that's the ultimate kind of, you know, you can really see that people, including children, are kind of living out that experience of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Okay, we're in the middle of a sentence in schools of freedom. Okay, so we remember the battles our ancestors fought, and why? So that my freedom is never sacrificed to yours or purchased at the cost of someone else's. Okay, here are the societal implications of Seder night for Sachs as well, responsibility in society and the development of moral society. That is why to this day on Passover we eat matzah, the unleavened bread of affliction. Okay, so we don't eat it just for ourselves, we eat it to bring us into this new idea of time and experience. Okay, so continuing on for this idea of inculcating the values and inculcating the experience, we can now see what he says in his book, To Heal a Fractured World. Okay, a book which is Le Raper Olam Shabor, has become very, very popular in Israel. Okay, and we'll see again how Seder night is very much at the root of experiencing what it is to be a Jew, not just as recalling Jewish history, historia, but as being engaged in the Toldot, in the development of the Jewish people, ultimately heading towards a destiny together, Jewish destiny. Source 9, to be a Jewish child is to learn how to question. 4 times the Mosaic books refer to children asking questions, the 4 sons of the Haggadah. The most significant family ritual, the Seder service of Passover, begins with the questions asked by a child. Against cultures that see unquestioning obedience as the ideal behavior of a child, and coming from England, I can attest to this, this cultural fact of, you know, children should be seen and not heard, and you have, you know, kind of in contrast to this, Rav Sachs, you know, writing from within that context saying, you know, we're meant to hear children. We want to hear the questions of children. The ideal behavior of the child in Jewish tradition, we see in the Haggadah with regards to the child who has not learned to ask. Okay, the one she'eno yodea lish'ol. Okay, what does that mean? That is the lowest, not the highest stage of development. Education in Judaism is active, not passive. So what happens when we ask a question? What's meant to happen when we ask a question at Seder night? What are your thoughts?
Discussion.
Discussion. Excellent. So this isn't just, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh and then sit down. This is Ma nishtana halayla hazeh and let's get a discussion going, right? Let's talk about this. And this isn't meant to be a situation where the adults know all the answers. The child asks the question and the adults know the answers, which is, the children's daily experience. Okay, this is an intergenerational act where the idea of time, also in terms of generations, unravels, because actually, through the ideas of the children, and here we can kind of really reach a deeper level of this notion of time. The children represent the future. And if the children represent the future and they're asking questions, then this is ultimately their discussion. This is their future. This is their lived experience. Okay. All right. So now we reach the stage really where we can understand that at Seder night, we're giving up on this idea of history, okay, from a religious and spiritual perspective, and we're completely, we're throwing ourselves into an experience of Yetziat Mitzrayim in the present tense, in the now, okay, and the now which then translates into the future, okay. Source 10. At the very moment that we gather to remember the past, we speak about the future. Okay, so as we've just said, this is meant to cause people it's meant to generate an identification with the Jewish destiny. It's meant to generate and inculcate values which will then cause people to go on to write their own letter in the Torah scroll, to have their own experience. The children, as representatives of the future, bring us into the present tense and the future tense, okay, which is based on the question, how the children meant to understand what happened to our ancestors in Egypt, as they'll understand that through the future, through turning the tenses on their heads, not as a radical new contemporary idea, but as an idea that's very much rooted in the Haggadah. What is distinctive about Jewish time is that we experience the present not as an isolated moment, but as a link in a chain connecting past and future. This is exactly what Seder night is. Okay, it's a link in a chain. It's that same chain that we come back to, but we're every year. But as you mentioned, but we're also developing. We're continuing. We're passing on. We're moving forward, and we're progressing toldot towards that future. Okay. So we can begin to see then how this idea of memory is not about recalling events in a history class or in a department of Historia Clalit. It's not about recalling events. There's no Megillah. It's about activating our sense of lived experience, our sense of memory, and the memory which is actually about us today, us in a couple of weeks' time at Seder night. Don't tell me how soon it's coming. And beyond that, right? And what that generates, okay? Because it's meant to really kind of propel us towards the future and not just be about that night itself. Yes.
You opened your class saying that it's about time. Mm-hmm. And we know that God is beyond time. He created time as a construct for us. So if there's no past, present, and future for God, meaning the ultimate reality, there is no time. Past, present, and future is for God all happening at once. So maybe Leil HaSeder is that night where we try to take a step out of the time construct. And in that case, for God, it's happening now. All the past, present, and future is in existence at the same time.
Wow. That's really powerful. I think you're right. And that's part of kind of, you know, being releasing ourselves from the limitations of how we see time, as we've been taught to see time as in 3 tenses. I don't want to get too philosophical. It's not for today.
I'm sorry, I just,
No.
no, the question at the beginning, how can we possibly see ourselves? But then maybe if we're meant to really be connecting past, present, and future, that's very a godly demand of existing without the construct of time.
Mhm.
It's very
Yeah.
Einstein, very Einstein, it's what his theories are.
Right.
Proving that exists.
Yeah. I think it, you know, it generates amazing questions about, you know, about what the idea of time is. As I said, you know, I don't want to get too abstract and too theoretical, but there are fascinating abstract and theoretical questions as well. But let's, you know, we're about to talk about this idea of tenses and really kind of coming away from these idea of tenses. And then, you know, we've spoken about this until now as us as Jewish people experiencing Seder night. Okay, can we say anything bigger about this, more universal perhaps, about the significance of seeing time in this way? We're going to skip source 11, possibly come back to it. Because one of the most profound examples we see in the Torah of the mixing up of tenses and the release of the very strict notions of past, present, future is in the story of the Sneh HaBoel, the burning bush. Okay, I'm fascinated by the idea of the burning bush. I've written about it. I have a whole university course dedicated to it. And you know, this is just this is really kind of one snippet of all of that. But we see the divine revelation to Moshe at the burning bush through a discussion really about time. Okay, and there are many ways we can talk about the burning bush, and you know there's so much we can say, and we're just going to look at the words Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh. Again, I'm apologizing for presuming prior knowledge of the basic story of the Sneh HaBoel, but what I wanted to do is connect Rav Sax's interpretation of the words Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh to the idea of Seder night. Okay, firstly, let's just, you know, we'll put it out there that the burning bush is not the ultimate divine revelation. Okay, we're not called upon to experience, you know, Moshe's experience at the burning bush as if we ourselves had been standing. We're not called upon to do that. We are called upon to do that with Ma'amad Har Sinai, as if we ourselves were there. We are called upon to do that with Yetziat Mitzrayim, as we're seeing in Seder night. The reason why the burning bush is perhaps less important in Jewish thought is because it's revelation to a single individual. Okay, and maybe perhaps it's played down in light of Christianity and Islam, who basically emphasize divine revelation to one individual, supposedly, whereas we seek to emphasize the idea of Ma'amad Har Sinai to a collective, okay, which is part of our whole discussion of collective Jewish destiny, okay. and why we sit together in the same way at the Seder table. It's not, one person on their own, each person in that, relativized world of freedom where, everybody just goes and does what they want. That's not the Jewish idea. Now, when we say the words Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh, what do we know about them? And how are they translated?
Past, present, future.
In what way?
God was, God is, God will be.
Okay. And that's also in Adon Olam, right? Where we read that. Yes. Hu hayahu, yes, nachon. In the words, Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh. What do we know about them and how do we translate them? How are they translated? Moshe comes to the site of the burning bush. Hashem reveals himself to Moshe, right? He sees this kind of this miraculous, he's thrust into a miraculous experience. He says, who are you? And Hashem says, Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh. Okay, and then it continues, but what does that mean? What do we know about that?
The future.
The future. Yeah. Yeah.
And you cannot know Hashem as a person. I am who I am and I will be who I will be. It leaves that open, like you will not know, you'll never know.
You'll never know. Fair. When you said, I am what I am, I will be what I will be, that is the entire generational discussion about how to translate the words Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh. There was another comment here. Unpredictable. Brilliant. The modern Jewish philosophers have a lot to say about this. There have been debates through Jewish history and philosophy of all generations about how to translate the words, including from Philo of Alexandria, who was one of the main Jewish interpreters of Plato, through modern times. Okay, and in modern times, Moses Mendelssohn tries, and then we have other modern Jewish thinkers who then challenge the accepted modes of talking about Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh, and really we discover that we're talking about this idea of tenses, okay, and how maybe we've been, the words have been mistranslated. We're going to see this in a second, and how a new translation or a more accurate translation helps us see the idea of time differently. Okay, so there's a lot of terminology here. I apologize. I'm going to explain the important parts of it, but I'm going to not explain other parts because they're not for now. Okay, source number 12. Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh has been mistranslated over the centuries. It has been translated as being in the present. The idea of being is a big idea in modern Jewish in modern philosophy. This idea of being, of ontology, and he says it has been translated as being in the present. What's he talking about? The many Christian and Latin Greek translations of the words Eheyeh Ashel Eheyeh as I am that I am. Okay, and that's a translation that also came into Jewish translations of the Tanakh. Okay, that didn't kind of remain in those spheres. Since Greek philosophers through medieval and modern times, Aquinas, who is a Christian medieval theologian, as true being, what it means to really be, and self-sufficient or non-dependent on the human world. Hegel, the concrete universal. Schelling's transcendental ego. Heidegger's ontotheology. Those are the parts that I'm skipping. The mistake of all of these translations is obvious to the merest beginner in Hebrew. When we say the word eheyeh, ani eheyeh bebet cafe ba'od sha'a, what am I saying? I will be at the coffee shop in an hour, right? So why is eheyeh translated as I am, when actually it means it's talking about the future tense? It's not talking about what it means to be. It's not an abstract idea of ontology. It's about what is going to be, okay? Or this idea of toldot, the development of, the engagement it with, okay? The phrase means I will be what I will be. The verb does not use the present tense. And this great mistranslation must be overturned to place a future horizon of what is potential rather than what has being. Okay, what are we going to take from this? We're going to take from this idea of time, of future, and of giving up on this sense of tenses. It's not only in the words eheyeh asher eheyeh, it repeats itself in ki eheyeh imach. Okay, it's something that's that repeats itself in that very moment of divine revelation. It's to do with the unknown. It's to do with, he uses the word potential, which I think is a great word, at least for, for us talking in the English language. Potential to talk about something that is burning. I don't mean to talk about the burning bush, but to talk about our lived experience on Seder night as something that is boel, burning, bubbling, on fire, engaged, right? We have these questions, we can have arguments, we can have discussion. And all of that is not just to have a nice time at Seder night. That is all about writing the letter, the individual letter in the Torah. That's about giving up on this idea of memory as history and saying what we're doing tonight is very much to do with our future. Okay. Continuing, this is from another source in Sachs. The words mean I will be whatever I will be. Sachs changes his mind on this. He at first translates it as I will be what I will be, and then says I will be whatever I will be. Okay, there isn't that much difference, but I think whatever I will be is almost, is far more open, leaves far more potential for, a human engagement in the idea of God, let alone an experience of God on Seder night. It means I am the future tense. I am the God of freedom whose future can't be predicted by humans. We cannot write the past linear, chronological type of history, that historia klalit. We can't write it for the future. We don't know what will happen. Okay, and when I say this, of course, I'm, with you thinking about current events as well. But what we can do is connect to what is the potential. And how do we connect to what is potential? How do we connect to the future, which, might seem even more abstract than the past? And here it's really a sense of, we can't know, right? But what we can do is generate lived experience. And the main way to do that in Jewish life is through Seder night. That is really the microcosm of the disintegration of those tenses. When we say, for one evening, at least, giving up on, these three tenses that we were taught about, as children, as past, present, and future. And we're entering into another dimension. Okay, we're going to leave that idea of tenses behind us, and we're going to see how this new idea of time, where the tenses are mixed up, what that can do, what kind of opportunity, what religious and spiritual opportunity and type of engagement we can have at Seder night. And I think this is really, really exciting, okay, as a way of reframing it through the idea of time. I wanted to bring in parallel the thought of really, it's really to develop it. I mean, we've kind of reached the crux of the argument, but it's to show a kind of another type of contemporary philosophical engagement with the idea of time and what we do on Seder night as participants. Okay, so we're participants we're now thrusting ourselves into this new engagement with the potential, with the future. Okay, we're giving up on this notion of repeating in a chronological sense what happened in history and forcing people around the table to do that with us. No, we know there's already an injunction to have a lived experience that's even been written into the halakha as something that you have to do. Not all of us are maybe kind of open to that idea on a daily level, and that's also why Seder night is so unique and experiential, because we're thrust into this different dimension. Okay, and we have the children asking the questions who are that's not just that we've seen, it's part of the educational Jewish vision, education as proactive and not passive, not learning historical facts by rote, but engaging in what it is to be Jewish in the present, writing their letter in the Torah, representing the future. Okay, so even if what we take out of this is saying our engagement in the future is part of what it is to listen to Manish Tana, to actually sit back and say, well, I'm a grown-up. I'm going to listen to somebody who's younger than me, to somebody who represents the future, whose thoughts and discussions and issues represent what will be in the future, who are going to be looking back on our world today, right? And, with all the events going on, and they're going to be saying, what was it like to have Leila Seder during this war? Okay, it's very much the elephant in the room, I think, with the, we've mentioned 7th of October and everything, but, for me, it's hard to talk about all of this, to talk about time and this extra dimension in these times without mentioning it. And I think actually, it can even kind of maybe deepen experience this year, because we're really in an abyss. We're really in times of praying for redemption. When should be the time of praying for redemption, of saying Hallel for an experience. Saying Hallel in the evening for something we didn't even experience, right? Can we say Hallel for something that we're praying will happen in the future? It really opens all kinds of new possibilities. Okay, so the nearly final other philosophical view I wanted to bring. Before we read it, I just want to say that this other philosophical view adds in the following idea to our frame and everything we've said so far. We've spoken about this dimension and what we are called to do and what we are thrust in to do, especially this year, engaging in this idea of potential. What will be, we don't know. What can be, we are involved in that. We have to be compelled by that, and we have to be compelled by that enough to sit back and to listen to the questions of the future, to listen to the questions of the next generation. And I think also here, when we look at the young people who are on the front lines in the war, it's the younger generation who are leading us. I think many of us are looking to them, and we're amazed by the capabilities and the courage and the gvura of this younger generation. And I think it's really, really, just embedded in Seder night, this idea of the younger generation representing the future. So what is our role? Our role is to bear witness to this religious experience that we have on Seder night. We are witnesses to Yetziat Mitzrayim, given on our now newfound understanding of the idea of time. We can see how everybody can be invited, called to experience Yetziat Mitzrayim as if they themselves were there. Okay? If we can be called to experience things in the future, the Geula, as if we are there, to celebrate, right? As he said, Rav Sachs, to drink the wine of victory, right? Then we can also take forward from the past, from Yetziat Mitzrayim, the ideas that we're having today, therefore breaking down that very limited categorization of tenses, past, present, future, and seeing how it all really comes together. Okay, and we bear witness as witnesses this year to Leila Seder, to our involvement and to everybody else's involvement in Leila Seder. Now, one of the, there's a very famous Jewish philosopher called Immanuel Levinas. I've said a few times in the class, you know, this is material for another share and another course and whatever, okay? One of the ideas that Levinas speaks about is the idea of bearing witness. Levinas was a 20th century French Jewish philosopher whose big kind of idea that he framed post-World War II was called ethics as first philosophy. In a nutshell, I'm not interested in any abstract theoretical philosophy you might have to say, unless its implications for society are ethical and moral. So he very much shared this view of responsibility, what we said about Isaiah Berlin and Rav Sachs, this freedom, not just freedom to go and do what I want, okay, but a more mature sense of freedom to, right? It's like, don't ask what my country can do for me, ask what I can do for my country. Now, we've seen that, you know, the young generation of today are paradigmatic, I think, of that. So we're just going to read a couple of sentences, and I'm going to just relate it back to what we've said. So it's from this book called Ethics and Infinity. Ethics and Infinity is a collection of interviews. Okay, there's a Christian theologian called Philip Nemo who interviews Levinas on all sorts of ideas, and one of the themes is about testimony. Okay, what does it mean to give testimony? Now, I've been very interested in this idea of testimony as applied to Moshe at the burning bush. What does it mean to stand and be part of Revelation? Are you an onlooker who looks over there at the bush? It's also very much related to today's world, to October 7th. What role did people play on October 7th? What role are people playing now? You know, if you hear the news, if you hear things that happened, you're not just an objective kind of listener at the side. You're completely engaged and implicated in what happens because of the collective Jewish destiny. It's not just the Historia Klalit, right? It's Toldot Am Yisrael. That's really what is happening. So I've asked that question in terms of the burning bush, and now I'm asking the question as well of bearing witness with regard to Seder night. Source 13. You continue to think of testimony as based on knowledge, he's saying to this Christian theologian. He's saying, you know, what does it mean to give testimony? You know, it's factual, it's chronological, it's linear, which is exactly what we've said about Historia Klalit. You need to release yourself from this very strict, linear sense of history, of knowledge. The concept of testimony I am trying to describe surely implies a mode of revelation. Like Moshe at the burning bush, I suggest that when we take part this year in Seder night, we are like Moshe at the burning bush. We're completely implicated in what's going to happen. And we could go further and say, you know, this is we're giving testimony, we're bearing witness to Ma'amad Sinai, which is what we're called to do. Okay, and then B'chol Dol Vadol, we do this at Seder night as well. It's a type of revelation that you're engaged in which the other manifests itself in subjectivity is the very phenomenon of inspiration. Okay, the idea of inspiration here is important because giving testimony, as it is maybe in a court of law, can actually be a religious and spiritual act, okay, and connected to the lived experience that we spoke about at the beginning of this year. The glory of the infinite reveals itself through what it is capable of doing in the witness. Who is the witness? Who are the witnesses? We are. Who else? You're right. Who else is? God. Who else is? And all of the examples we've spoken about. Wow. The future is the witness. The future is the witness to our, wow. Who's the witness?
Our children.
Yeah, our children are absolutely witness to the way we are going to create the lived experience this year. You know, many of people's children, grandchildren who are out there fighting today. They're absolutely, witnesses. We're witnesses. We're witness to them, right? And this isn't just a kind of dry, linear, historical type of witnessing. So, in addition to what we've said about time and the way that we can see time this year, I think it adds an extra level of significance, and it also allows us maybe to apply it more in our thinking this year if we think about ourselves as witnesses, okay? Not witnesses as people just coming to sit at the table and go through the same thing as we did last year. Witnesses who are called to and who are thrust into a different type of religious and spiritual engagement this year, in particular, as Moshe was at the Sneh HaBoel at the burning bush, as Am Yisrael were at Har Sinai, and as we are at Seder night as of utmost importance and on a par with that in terms of our engagement with the world around us. And I think we can really do that thanks to this new dimension of how we see time. I think there's a couple of minutes for questions. Thank you very much to everybody.